She was 45 years old when she realized that nobody really knew her, not because she was mysterious, but because she had spent her entire life becoming exactly what everyone else needed. Her name was Samina, and if you asked people about her, they would say the same things. She's very patient. She never complains. She's such a good woman. No one ever said she was happy. Every morning, Samina woke up before the rest of the house. Not because she loved mornings, but because silence was the only time she belonged to herself. She would sit on the edge of the bed for a moment, listening to the slow breathing of her husband beside her, and wonder when her life had become this quiet in the wrong way. Not peaceful. Empty. Her days followed a rhythm she could perform without thinking. Breakfast. Lunch. Laundry. Phone calls. Smiles. Nods. Adjustments. She had mastered the art of saying it's fine even when it wasn't. Especially when it wasn't. Samina used to dream once. Not big, loud dreams, just small ones. She wanted to open a little tailoring shop. She was good with her hands, good with fabric, good with colors. People used to praise her work when she was younger. You have talent, they said. But talent, she learned, was something women were expected to give up quietly. First, it was for her parents. Then, for her marriage. Then, for her children. And each time, she told herself the same lie: this is what a good woman does. Her husband, Rashid, wasn't cruel. That made everything harder. He wasn't abusive, didn't shout, didn't raise his hand. He simply assumed Samina would always adjust. And she did. For 23 years. He made decisions without asking, spoke over her opinions, dismissed her exhaustion with a casual, "You worry too much." And Samina stayed silent, because she had learned that silence kept the peace. Her children were grown now, not fully independent, but old enough to no longer need her the way they once did. Yet somehow, her responsibilities had only increased. Emotional support. Financial stress. Family expectations. Everyone leaned on her, and she carried them all, quietly breaking inside. Some nights, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange ache in her chest, not pain, not fear, but something worse. Regret. Regret for the woman she might have been if she had ever chosen herself. The moment everything began to change didn't come with shouting or drama. It came with a sentence said casually, almost carelessly. One afternoon, while Samina was serving tea to guests, people she hadn't invited but was expected to entertain, she overheard Rashid talking in the next room. He laughed softly and said, "She doesn't mind. Samina never says no." The words hit her harder than any insult ever could. She never says no. In that moment, something inside her cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. Because she realized it was true. She had trained everyone around her to believe her needs didn't exist. And now, even when she was drowning, no one noticed. She carried the tray into the room with steady hands, placed the cups down, and smiled like she always did. But inside her chest, a question kept repeating itself, louder each time. What would happen if I finally said no? That night, Samina stood alone in the kitchen long after everyone had gone to sleep. The house was dark, the clock ticking loudly on the wall. She rested her hands on the counter and felt tears slide down her face, not from sadness alone, but from a sudden, terrifying clarity. She had given everything. And still, it wasn't enough. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to think a dangerous thought. What if I stopped living for everyone else? She didn't know then that this single thought would unravel years of silence, expose painful truths, and force her to confront a betrayal she never saw coming, one that would change her forever. But this was the beginning. Samina didn't sleep that night. Her body lay still on the bed, but her mind kept moving, replaying moments she had ignored for years. Rashid's careless words echoed in her head again and again. She never says no. Each time she remembered them, they sounded less like an observation and more like a verdict that had been passed on her entire existence. When morning came, nothing looked different. The same walls. The same kitchen. The same routine waiting for her like an obligation she could no longer escape. But something inside Samina had shifted. It was small, fragile, but undeniable, a quiet awareness that she had reached the edge of herself. She stood in front of the mirror while tying her dupatta, studying her reflection as if seeing it for the first time. The woman looking back at her looked older than 45. Not because of wrinkles, but because of wear. Emotional wear. The kind that settles deep into the eyes when a person has lived too long without being heard. For years, she had told herself that patience was strength. That endurance was virtue. That silence was wisdom. But now she wondered, what if silence was simply erasing her? That day, Samina decided to do something she had never done before. She decided to speak. It wasn't a dramatic decision. She didn't plan a confrontation or rehearse angry words. She just wanted to express something simple. Honest. Human. She wanted to tell Rashid that she was tired. That she needed help. That she wanted to feel like more than a background presence in her own home. When Rashid returned from work that evening, Samina served dinner as usual. They ate mostly in silence, the television filling the space between them. Her heart beat faster with every passing minute, fear and courage wrestling inside her chest. Finally, she spoke. Rashid, she said softly. He didn't look up at first. I've been feeling very tired lately, she continued, choosing her words carefully. Not just physically. Emotionally too. He glanced at her briefly, then back at the screen. Everyone gets tired, Samina. You worry too much. She swallowed. This was the moment she usually stopped. The moment she retreated. But she pushed forward, even though her voice trembled. I think I need some rest. Maybe some time for myself. I've been managing everything alone for a long time. Rashid sighed, clearly annoyed now. What is this suddenly? You're at home all day. What kind of stress do you have? The words landed like a slap. At home all day. As if the endless labor of caring, cooking, managing, listening, sacrificing, as if none of it counted because it didn't come with a paycheck or recognition. Samina felt something sink deep inside her chest. She tried once more. I just feel invisible sometimes. That finally got his attention. He turned toward her, frowning. Why are you making drama out of nothing? You've always been like this. Emotional. And just like that, the conversation was over. Not with shouting. Not with cruelty. But with dismissal, the kind that hurts the most because it makes you question your own reality. That night, Samina lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, her earlier courage slowly dissolving into shame. Maybe he's right, she thought. Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe this is just life. But somewhere deep inside, another voice whispered back, or maybe this is what happens when a woman speaks after years of silence. In the days that followed, Samina tried to be more aware of herself. She noticed things she had once ignored. How decisions were made without her input. How her exhaustion was treated as inconvenience. How her kindness was assumed, not appreciated. She noticed how easily people leaned on her, relatives calling with problems, neighbors asking for favors, children expecting emotional support, and how rarely anyone asked her how she was doing. One afternoon, her sister-in-law called and casually informed her that guests would be staying over the weekend. No question. Just information. Before Samina could stop herself, she said something she had never said before. I don't think I can manage guests this weekend. There was silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean? Her sister-in-law asked sharply. You always manage. Samina's hands shook as she held the phone. I'm not feeling well, she said quietly. I need rest. The response came immediately, cold and judgmental. Rest? From what? You women have become very sensitive these days. When Samina hung up, her heart pounded, but there was something else there too: relief. Fearful relief, but real. Later that evening, Rashid confronted her. My sister called, he said. Why are you refusing guests now? What will people think? Samina felt the familiar pressure rising, the urge to apologize, to fix things, to take the blame. But she didn't. Instead, she said calmly, I'm tired. I can't do everything anymore. Rashid stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. Since when do you talk like this? She didn't answer, because she didn't know how to explain years of buried exhaustion in a single sentence. From that day on, the atmosphere in the house changed. Not loudly. Not openly. But subtly. Rashid became distant. Conversations grew shorter. There was an unspoken tension, as if Samina had broken an invisible rule by acknowledging her own limits. Even her children seemed uncomfortable with the shift. They weren't used to a mother who said no. And Samina began to feel something she hadn't expected. Guilt. Guilt for resting. Guilt for refusing. Guilt for choosing herself even in small ways. Late one evening, while folding laundry, she overheard Rashid on the phone. His voice was low, irritated. She's changed, he said. I don't know what's gotten into her. She used to be so easy. Easy. The word pierced her. She realized then that her value in this family had always been measured by how little space she took up. How much she gave without asking. How quietly she endured. That night, Samina sat alone in the bedroom, clutching the edge of the bed as tears slid down her face. Not because she wanted to go back to who she was, but because becoming someone new was terrifying. She wondered if choosing herself meant losing everything else. What she didn't know yet was that the real pain was still ahead. Because the more she tried to reclaim her voice, the more resistance she would face. And soon, she would uncover a truth that would make her question not just her marriage but the foundation of her entire life. This was no longer just about exhaustion. This was about betrayal. And it was closer than she imagined. Samina didn't go looking for the truth. That was the cruelest part of it all. She wasn't suspicious by nature, nor was she the kind of woman who searched for hidden meanings or secret intentions. For most of her life, she had accepted things as they were, believing that trust was built by not asking too many questions. But sometimes, truth has a way of finding you quietly, unexpectedly when you least feel prepared to face it. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. The kind of afternoon that blended into every other day of her life. Rashid had forgotten his phone at home. At first, Samina didn't think much of it. He often left things behind in a rush. She noticed the phone vibrating on the dining table while she was dusting. Once. Then again. And again. The screen lit up repeatedly with notifications. Unknown names. Missed calls. Messages. She told herself not to look. She told herself it wasn't her place. But when the phone rang again, this time with a name saved simply as R, something tightened in her chest. She stared at the glowing screen for several seconds, her heart pounding louder than the ringing tone. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, not with intention, but with instinct. She answered. Rashid, a woman's voice asked softly. Samina froze. Yes, this is his wife, Samina replied after a pause, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then the woman spoke again, carefully this time. Oh. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. Who is this? Samina asked. Another pause. Longer. Heavier. I think, you should ask Rashid that, the woman said quietly, and the line went dead. Samina stood there holding the phone long after the call ended. The house felt suddenly unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves were listening. Her heart raced, not with anger, but with a deep, sinking fear, the kind that tells you something important has just shifted. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she did something she had never done before. She unlocked his phone. The password was their anniversary. The same date she had celebrated alone so many times while Rashid was busy with work. Her fingers felt numb as she scrolled through the messages. At first, they seemed harmless casual greetings, short check-ins. But the further she read, the clearer it became. Inside jokes. Familiarity. Late-night messages. Concerned questions about his day. Comfort that sounded too personal to be innocent. And then she saw one message that made her breath catch. I wish things were simpler. I hate that you have to hide. Hide. Samina sat down slowly, her knees weakening beneath her. The phone slipped from her hand onto the couch beside her. She stared at the floor, her mind struggling to process what her heart already understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't harmless. This was betrayal. For years, she had blamed herself for feeling distant, unwanted, invisible. For years, she had wondered what she was doing wrong. And now she realized something that shattered her more than the messages ever could. Rashid hadn't changed because of her. He had changed because he had already left emotionally long before she ever noticed. When Rashid returned home that evening, Samina was sitting in the living room, waiting. The phone lay on the table between them like a silent witness. Her hands were folded in her lap, her posture calm in a way that surprised even herself. Who is R? She asked quietly. Rashid stopped mid-step. What? He said, attempting confusion. Your phone, Samina continued, her voice steady. It kept ringing. A woman called. His face changed. Just for a moment. But it was enough. Why were you answering my phone? He snapped. Don't you have any sense of boundaries? That was when something inside Samina finally broke. Not loudly. Not violently. But completely. You lost the right to talk about boundaries, she said, meeting his eyes, when you crossed mine. Silence filled the room. Thick. Suffocating. Rashid ran a hand through his hair, avoiding her gaze. It's not what you think, he muttered. Samina almost laughed. Almost. Then explain it to me, she said. Because for the first time in years, I'm actually listening. He hesitated. Then sighed. She understands me, he said finally. She listens. She doesn't complain all the time. Samina felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. So this was it. After decades of loyalty, patience, and sacrifice, her greatest failure was that she had needs. I stopped complaining a long time ago, Samina replied quietly. You just stopped hearing me. Rashid said nothing. That night, Samina locked herself in the bathroom and cried until her chest hurt. She cried for the years she had given. For the trust she had offered without hesitation. For the version of herself that believed endurance would be rewarded with love. But beneath the pain, something else began to surface. Clarity. She saw her life with painful honesty now. How often she had shrunk herself to make others comfortable. How she had ignored her intuition. How she had accepted less than she deserved because she thought asking for more was selfish. In the days that followed, Rashid tried to act normal. He avoided the subject, hoping silence would fix what honesty had exposed. But Samina couldn't go back, not after seeing the truth so clearly. She began to notice the patterns. The late nights. The excuses. The emotional distance that had nothing to do with stress or age. And slowly, something unexpected happened. Her sadness began to turn into anger. Not the explosive kind but the steady, focused kind that gives a woman strength. For the first time in her life, Samina didn't ask herself how to save the marriage. She asked herself how to save herself. She started spending more time alone. Taking walks. Sitting with her thoughts instead of drowning them in chores. She revisited the dreams she had buried. The tailoring shop. The independence she had once imagined but never allowed herself to pursue. And with every small act of self-awareness, she felt a strange sense of power returning. But power has consequences. Because when a woman who has been silent for decades begins to change, the people who benefited from her silence feel threatened. And Rashid was no exception. Soon, Samina would learn that uncovering the truth was only the beginning. The real battle would be standing firm in it, especially when guilt, manipulation, and fear tried to pull her back into the life she was finally learning to leave behind. This story was no longer about heartbreak. It was about awakening. After the truth came out, Samina expected shouting. Accusations. Apologies, maybe. What she didn't expect was silence, the strategic, calculated kind. Rashid didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't explain. He simply carried on as if nothing had happened, as if the discovery of his betrayal was just an uncomfortable interruption that would eventually fade away if ignored long enough. At first, Samina wondered if this was his way of giving her space. But soon she realized it was something else entirely. It was punishment. He stopped asking her anything. Meals were eaten without conversation. If she spoke, he responded with short, clipped answers. His distance wasn't accidental, it was designed to make her feel guilty, to make her doubt herself, to make her question whether speaking up had been a mistake. And for a moment, it worked. Late at night, Samina lay awake replaying everything in her head. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I should have waited. Maybe this is my fault. Years of conditioning didn't disappear overnight. The instinct to fix things, to smooth over discomfort, still lived inside her. But something had changed. The pain she felt now was different from before. It wasn't the dull ache of being unseen. It was sharp, clear, and strangely honest. She wasn't confused anymore. She knew exactly why she was hurting. One evening, Rashid finally broke the silence. "You've changed," he said flatly, without looking at her. "You're not the woman I married." Samina looked at him for a long moment. "No," she replied calmly. "I'm the woman you ignored." He scoffed. "I gave you everything. A home. Security. Respect." She almost laughed at the word respect. "Respect isn't silence," she said. "And security that costs someone their voice isn't security at all." Rashid's expression hardened. "So what do you want? To ruin this family?" There it was. The guilt. The weapon he knew would hurt her the most. For years, Samina had been the emotional glue holding everything together. The idea of being the reason for conflict terrified her. And Rashid knew it. But instead of shrinking, Samina felt something unexpected rise within her resolve. "I want honesty," she said. "And I want dignity. If that feels like ruin to you, then maybe this family was built on the wrong things." Rashid said nothing after that. He stood up and left the room, slamming the door behind him. Samina's hands trembled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Over the next few days, the manipulation became subtler. Rashid's sister visited unannounced, her concern poorly disguised as criticism. "Marriage requires compromise," she said pointedly. "Men make mistakes. A good woman knows when to forgive." Samina listened quietly. Then she replied, "A good woman also knows when she's being erased." Her sister-in-law stared at her, stunned. Even her children, unaware of the full truth but sensitive to the tension, began to pull away. Their discomfort felt like rejection, and it hurt more than Samina expected. But she reminded herself of something important. Growth is lonely before it becomes liberating. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old cupboard, Samina found a box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were fabric samples, sketches, old measuring tapes, remnants of the tailoring dream she once abandoned. Her fingers traced the edges of the cloth, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something warm stir in her chest. Hope. That evening, she did something small but radical. She searched online for local tailoring classes and small business permits. Her heart raced as she clicked through the pages. She wasn't planning to leave. Not yet. She was simply planning to stand. And that, she realized, was the most frightening thing she had ever done. When Rashid found out she had enrolled in a short tailoring course, his reaction was immediate. "What nonsense is this?" he snapped. "At this age? What will people say?" Samina looked at him steadily. "I don't care anymore." The words surprised them both. "This family needs you," he argued. "Your responsibilities come first." "For years," she replied, "they were the only thing." That night, Rashid accused her of being selfish, of abandoning her duties, of destroying stability. Each word was meant to pull her back into the role she had always played. But Samina had learned something powerful. Guilt loses its power when you stop accepting blame for other people's choices. She attended her first class the following week. Sitting among other women, some younger, some older, Samina felt awkward, nervous, and alive all at once. For 2 hours, she wasn't a wife or a mother. She was just herself. When she returned home, the house felt colder than ever. Rashid barely acknowledged her. The tension thickened, wrapping around every interaction like fog. But Samina noticed something else too. She was standing straighter. She was breathing deeper. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the silence. What she didn't know yet was that Rashid wasn't finished. That his distance would soon turn into something more desperate. More manipulative. Because when control begins to slip, those who depend on it rarely let go quietly. And soon, Samina would be forced to make a choice she had been avoiding. Stay and disappear. Or leave and face the unknown. Samina had always believed that pain arrived loudly through shouting, slamming doors, or cruel words thrown in anger. But she was learning now that the deepest pain often arrived quietly, dressed as routine, hiding inside everyday moments until it became impossible to ignore. The house had grown unbearably silent. Rashid no longer argued. Instead, he acted as if Samina barely existed. He ate meals alone. He slept facing the wall. When relatives visited, he spoke over her, made decisions without acknowledging her presence, and referred to her plans as phases she would eventually grow out of. At first, Samina tried to stay strong. She reminded herself that healing wasn't comfortable. That growth came with resistance. But there were nights when the loneliness felt heavier than the betrayal itself. One such night, she sat alone in the living room, the lights turned off, the television silent. Her phone buzzed with a message from one of her children. "Please don't make things harder for Abu. He's stressed enough." Samina stared at the screen for a long time. That message hurt more than Rashid's silence ever could. Because it confirmed her deepest fear that in choosing herself, she was being painted as the problem. The next morning, Rashid's mother came to visit. She didn't knock. She never did. She walked into the house with authority, sat down, and got straight to the point. "I've heard things," she said. "About your behavior." Samina braced herself. "You've always been a good woman," her mother-in-law continued. "Why are you changing now? At this age, peace matters more than pride." Samina felt something tighten in her chest. "This isn't pride," she said softly. "This is survival." Her mother-in-law sighed impatiently. "Women survive by adjusting. That's how it's always been." And there it was again, the expectation that her endurance was a duty, not a choice. Later that day, Rashid confronted her. "You're embarrassing me," he said. People are talking. My family thinks you've lost your senses. Samina looked at him, exhausted. And what do you think? She asked. He hesitated. I think you're making a mistake. That was the moment something inside Samina finally snapped. Not in anger. In clarity. I've made mistakes my entire life, she said. But choosing myself is not one of them. Rashid laughed bitterly. So what now? You want to leave? The question hung in the air between them. Samina hadn't planned to answer it. But the truth rose to her lips before fear could stop it. I want respect, she said. If I can't have that here, then yes. I'll leave. The room fell silent. Rashid's face darkened. You won't survive on your own, he said coldly. You've never even earned money. Samina felt the old doubt stir, but she pushed it aside. I've earned everything in this house, she replied. Just not in ways you valued. That night, she packed a small bag. Not to leave forever. Just to prove to herself that she could. She went to stay with a friend, another woman who had once been labeled difficult for asking for more. The apartment was small. The mattress thin. But the air felt lighter. For the first time in weeks, Samina slept without anxiety clawing at her chest. In the days that followed, Rashid called repeatedly. Not with apologies but with warnings. You're destroying the family. You're confusing the children. You'll regret this. And each time, Samina listened, then ended the call. She attended her tailoring classes during the day, worked on small orders at night, and felt something slowly returning to her. Confidence. The breaking point came during a family gathering. Rashid insisted she attend, hoping public pressure would force her back into place. Surrounded by relatives, Samina felt their eyes on her, judging, whispering, waiting. Someone finally asked, so, when are things going back to normal? Samina took a deep breath. And for the first time, she spoke her truth out loud. Normal was slowly killing me, she said calmly. I'm choosing a different life. The room erupted in murmurs. Rashid's face burned with humiliation. But Samina didn't flinch. Because in that moment, she understood something powerful. Choosing yourself will always disappoint people who benefited from your silence. She left the gathering that night knowing there was no going back. The bridge had burned. But on the other side of that fire was something she had never truly experienced before. Freedom. Life after separation wasn't the relief Samina had imagined, but it was honest. There were no illusions left, no expectations she had to meet just to be accepted. What remained was raw reality, and it frightened her more than she wanted to admit. The first few weeks were the hardest. She moved into a small rented portion on the edge of the city. It had one bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and windows that let in more dust than sunlight. The walls were bare, the cupboards almost empty. At night, the silence felt different from the one she had left behind. This silence didn't erase her, but it forced her to face herself. There were moments when fear crept in quietly. What if Rashid was right? What if she couldn't survive alone? What if choosing herself had cost her everything? On some nights, she sat on the floor with her back against the wall, counting her savings again and again, calculating how long they would last. The numbers never felt reassuring. Still, every morning, she woke up, made tea for herself, and reminded herself that this was her life now and that she had chosen it. Her tailoring work started slowly. One order. Then two. A neighbor recommended her to someone else. The money was small, but the feeling was something she had never experienced before. Earning. Not just income but self-worth. With each finished dress, Samina felt a piece of herself returning. Her hands moved with confidence she didn't know she still possessed. Fabric began to feel familiar again, like an old friend she had once abandoned but was now slowly welcoming back. But independence came with a price. Her children stopped calling as often. When they did, their voices were distant, cautious. They didn't ask how she was managing. They only asked when she was coming back. Rashid, meanwhile, shifted tactics. When guilt didn't work, he tried concern. "I'm worried about you," he said during one call. "This life isn't suitable for you." Samina listened quietly. "I'm worried about me too," she replied. "But at least now, I'm the one making the choices." That ended the conversation. Still, there were days when loneliness weighed heavily on her chest. Days when she missed the familiarity of her old life, not because it was good, but because it was known. Change required courage every single day, and courage was exhausting. One afternoon, while returning from the market, Samina overheard two women whispering behind her. "That's her," one said. "The one who left her husband." Samina felt her stomach tighten. Shame rose instinctively, but then she paused. She turned around, met their eyes, and walked past them without lowering her head. For the first time, other people's opinions didn't feel heavier than her own survival. Weeks turned into months. Her tailoring work expanded. She started receiving regular clients. One woman suggested she open a small shop together. The idea terrified Samina, but it also excited her in a way she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by endurance. Meanwhile, Rashid's behavior grew more erratic. He began showing up unannounced, criticizing her living conditions, questioning her decisions, reminding her of everything she had lost. "You've broken this family," he said one evening. "Are you happy now?" Samina looked at him calmly. "I'm not broken anymore," she said. "And that matters." That night, after he left, Samina cried not because she regretted her decision, but because she realized how deeply she had been conditioned to feel responsible for other people's emotions. Healing, she was learning, was unlearning. One evening, as she worked late into the night, stitching under a dim bulb, Samina felt something unexpected. Peace. Not joy. Not excitement. Just peace. She realized then that happiness wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly when you stopped fighting yourself. But just as Samina began to feel stable, life tested her again. A legal notice arrived at her door. Rashid wanted her back or else. And this time, he was prepared to fight dirty. The envelope lay on the table for a long time before Samina gathered the courage to open it. She already knew who it was from. The official stamp, the stiff paper, the unfamiliar legal language, it all felt cold and heavy, like a threat disguised as formality. Rashid had filed a legal notice. Not for reconciliation. For control. He accused her of abandonment. Of neglecting marital duties. Of damaging his reputation. The words blurred together as Samina read, her hands trembling slightly. Each sentence felt like a deliberate attempt to pull her back into fear, to remind her of the power he still believed he had over her life. For a moment, panic surged. She had never dealt with courts or lawyers before. Her life had been limited to home, family, and quiet sacrifice. The idea of standing alone against Rashid publicly, legally felt overwhelming. But then something unexpected happened. She didn't cry. Instead, she felt angry. Not the helpless anger of before, but a clear, steady one. The kind that rises when someone tries to take away the ground you've finally learned to stand on. That night, Samina barely slept. She sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, thinking about all the years she had stayed silent to keep the peace. And she realized something important. Her silence had never protected her. It had only protected everyone else. The next morning, she made a decision she never thought she would. She sought legal help. The lawyer was a woman in her early 50s, calm and composed, with eyes that had seen too many stories like Samina's. As Samina spoke haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, the lawyer listened without interruption. When Samina finished, she expected judgment. Instead, the lawyer said softly, "You're not wrong for wanting dignity." Those words stayed with her. Rashid didn't expect resistance. When he realized Samina had responded legally, his tone changed. The calls became frequent, alternating between anger and pleading. "You're taking this too far. We can still fix this. Why are you humiliating me like this?" Samina listened, then replied calmly, "I'm not humiliating you. I'm protecting myself." For the first time, she felt what it was like to stand on equal ground. But the pressure didn't stop. Relatives began calling, one after another, urging her to withdraw the case, to think about the family, to avoid shame. Each call chipped away at her emotional strength, but Samina held firm. Then came the hardest blow. Her children. One evening, her eldest called her, voice heavy with confusion and frustration. "Why are you doing this, am I? Abu is suffering. Can't you just come back?" Samina closed her eyes. This was the pain she had feared the most, not losing a marriage, but losing her children's understanding. "I'm not leaving you," she said gently. "I'm just choosing not to disappear anymore." There was silence on the line. Healing, she realized, didn't mean everyone would understand right away. The court date arrived sooner than she expected. That morning, Samina stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her scarf with shaky hands. She didn't look powerful. She didn't feel brave. But she went anyway. Inside the courtroom, Rashid avoided her gaze. He looked smaller than she remembered, not because he had changed, but because she had. When it was her turn to speak, Samina felt her throat tighten. The room felt too big, too public. But then she remembered all the nights she had cried silently, all the times she had swallowed her words to keep others comfortable. And she spoke. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Honestly. She spoke about emotional neglect. About years of adjustment. About betrayal. About choosing survival over silence. The room was quiet. For the first time in her life, Samina felt heard. The proceedings weren't over. The battle wasn't won. But when she stepped outside the courtroom that day, the sun felt warmer on her face. She hadn't broken. She hadn't backed down. And that, she realized, was her greatest victory yet. But life wasn't done testing her. Because sometimes, strength invites new challenges. And the next one would force Samina to confront not just her past but the future she was still afraid to claim. The months that followed were not easy, but they were real. Slowly, quietly, Samina's life began to settle into a new rhythm, one she was creating for herself for the very first time. The legal battle continued in the background, but it no longer defined her days. What defined her now were the choices she made each morning when she woke up without fear pressing on her chest. The most painful healing came through her children. At first, they remained distant, unsure of how to place her new strength into the version of mother they had always known. But time has a way of revealing truth. They began to notice changes not in Rashid, but in her. She sounded calmer. Stronger. More present in a way she had never been before. One evening, her youngest visited her small home. He looked around quietly, taking in the simplicity, the half-stitched fabrics, the measuring tapes on the table. After a long silence, he said softly, "You look lighter." That was the moment Samina knew. She hadn't lost her children. She had simply shown them a version of herself they had never seen before, a woman who chose honesty over endurance. As her tailoring work grew, Samina finally opened a small shop with the help of another woman who had once been afraid to start over too. The shop wasn't grand, but it was hers. Every stitch she sewed felt like proof that her life hadn't ended when her marriage cracked, it had begun. The legal matter eventually settled. Not perfectly. Not without loss. But with dignity. Rashid no longer held power over her choices. And for the first time, Samina understood that freedom didn't come from winning, it came from no longer being afraid to stand alone. On a quiet evening, sitting outside her shop as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samina reflected on the woman she used to be. The one who believed strength meant silence. The one who thought love required self-erasure. The one who stayed because she was afraid of the unknown. She felt compassion for that woman now, not shame. At 45, Samina didn't claim happiness as a constant state. But she claimed something far more powerful. Peace. Self-respect. A voice. And she knew, with calm certainty, that choosing herself had not ruined her life. It had saved it.